Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 10 about media and politics. It's Lesson 3 about popular media. In this lesson, you'll learn about propaganda, about popular media, about nonfiction as propaganda, and fiction as propaganda. So let's begin by defining what propaganda is. Propaganda is some sort of information that's presented in a biased or misleading or even downright false way, with the intent of influencing an audience to believe certain things to allow the people presenting the message to accomplish some particular political agenda. Here's a couple of real-world examples of this. On the left, you have an enlistment poster put up by the U.S. Army during the time of World War I, trying to convince Americans to join the Army. In it, it depicts a German soldier as an ape-like beast who is assaulting some innocent woman. This poster is trying to get the people who view it to think of Germans in a certain horrible way, to make them then want to go fight them as part of World War I. The image on the right is of a New York newspaper after Donald Trump won the New Hampshire primary. It depicts him as a clown. It describes his voters as being brain dead. In that case, it's trying to persuade people who otherwise might like Donald Trump to dislike him. People otherwise who might want to vote for him to then think twice about it because they don't want to be labeled as stupid. These are examples of propaganda where the people presenting the message are doing it in a way with bias, with misleading characterizations, perhaps even outright lies, in order to try to persuade people to believe certain things, thus they will then go do certain things. Now, let's talk about what popular media is and see how propaganda might show up in it. Popular media is media that's intended to reach some big audience. It's a form of mass media, and it's usually for entertainment purposes. And it's the kind of entertainment that is widely accepted in the cultural mainstream. So what kind of things am I talking about that we'd characterize as popular media? Well, we could categorize popular music as that. Widely distributed movies, well-known novels, highly rated TV shows, things like that. Things that masses of people view and that are culturally accepted as being part of our popular culture. Among these various types of popular media are what we can describe as nonfiction media. This is media that is at least claimed to be depicting reality. Examples of this might be a documentary film, say a film about some historical event or about some scientific discovery or about nature or whatever it is, or a biography about a person telling their life story. In whatever case it is, the documentary or the non-fiction book or whatever it may be is presenting itself as simply telling us the reality of what happened. Some examples of this are seen on this slide. Here we have a couple of movies. One, an old movie from several years ago called An Inconvenient Truth. The other, a more recent movie, 2016 Obama's America. And in the center we have a history book written by a man named Howard Zinn. In all three of these cases, we have the authors or the creators of these works claiming that they are simply delivering the unbiased facts of reality to the people. But in all three of these cases, critics would look at these and say that they are highly biased, that they are propaganda that is designed to, through misleading mechanisms, convince people to believe certain political things that they otherwise would not. Let's pick apart one of these just a little bit to show how this takes place. The film An Inconvenient Truth, presented on the previous slide, was a film about climate change, about global warming. You may have realized that when you saw the picture of it, of its movie poster with penguins walking through a desert. The movie used exaggerations. For example, one of the claims made in the movie was that within just a few years, sea levels would rise over 20 feet. The citation that it claimed for this was a series of scientific reports that really actually claimed that sea levels might rise 2 feet over 100 years. So it was a gross exaggeration made in the film, one of many such exaggerations. This was done by the filmmaker, Al Gore, former Vice President of the United States and candidate for president. It was done by him intentionally to try to sway the opinions of voters. He thought he had to be a little bit dramatic, a little bit over the top in his presentation, to get people to realize from his point of view just how bad climate change was, so that they would change their minds about it and then support legislation to fight it. So in that sense, he thought he was justified in exaggerating a little bit. But this is sort of the textbook definition of propaganda, where you provide misleading facts with the intended purpose of changing people's minds to then support some particular political policy. This sort of thing doesn't just happen in nonfiction works, but it also can happen in fiction. Now, what we mean by fiction is media that is claiming to just be talking about imaginary events. Now, you may wonder how that can be directed at influencing politics, particularly if the story is about some science fiction thing off in some parallel universe or whatever that really has nothing to do with our day-to-day lives. Nonetheless, fiction can be propaganda. Here are some examples. A couple of books: The Jungle by Upton Sinclair and 1984 by George Orwell, and a movie, Avatar. Now, The Jungle was about how immigrants were being treated, and it was also about the kind of jobs they had and the lack of safety in them. It was fictional characters in a fictional place, but it ended up having an influence on how government officials acted, particularly in trying to create safer work environments for people kind of on the lower edge of the workforce. 1984 was about an imaginary dystopian future in which totalitarian governments would rule the entire world. And it was intentionally presented as a warning against things like the government of the Soviet Union that used totalitarian tactics in the name of equality to oppress its people. In both these cases, you had purely fictional works that were allegories for real-world situations that the authors thought people needed to be warned about, and perhaps that politicians should work to avoid or change. But what about the one in the middle? Avatar. This is a science fiction movie set in an imaginary future on an imaginary planet with imaginary people. What does that have potentially to do with our current political world? How is that propaganda? Well, Avatar was designed to influence people's views about the present. In it, you have a native culture presented very sympathetically. You have corporations and military forces presented just the opposite, as evil and bad and wrong. And you have the battle taking place between these different groups over natural resources presented in such a way where the peaceful natives are obviously right and the invading corporations and military are obviously wrong. This can be directly applied to conflicts in our modern world between people who are trying to preserve nature, for example, and companies are trying to come in and mine or drill for oil or whatever it is, and protesters are trying to stop them on behalf of some Native American tribe or whatever. There are direct allegories in our modern world to this. And the filmmaker was intentionally trying to influence those things when he created this film. He was presenting it as a story that people could then use to relate to their real lives. And he hoped that in doing it, that they would identify certain people as bad and good based upon the bad and good in the movie. So, from these examples, I hope what you realize is that political propaganda can show up just about anywhere, even places where you might not think that it could show up, such as in a nonfiction book or in a fictional movie. Now let's review what we learned in this lesson. First of all, what is propaganda? Is it lies told to change people's opinions? Is it popular programs? Is it true stories, or is it imaginary tales? Propaganda is, one form of it, is lies told to change people's opinions. In other cases, it's not lies, it's simply biased information or incomplete information, misleading information. But the important part is that those tweaks away from the truth are used intentionally to try to change the opinions of others about political things. The movie Avatar is an example of what? Of disappointing special effects, of original plot construction, of a film about politics, or of propaganda in popular media. Avatar is an example of propaganda in popular media. All right, that finishes this lesson 3 from Unit 10. The next lesson from Unit 10 will be lesson 4 about online news.